Forbidden feelings tormented two weary souls, forcing them to build walls between themselves to keep a terrible sin at bay. But fate sometimes offers a glimmer of hope, and that's where our story begins. The owl had come at dawn, and by noon the world had a new name for her. Hermione stood at the wrought iron gates of Malfoy Manor, with the parchment folded against her ribs, inside her coat, where she could feel the edge of it through her shirt each time she breathed. The lane behind her was wet. It had rained in the night, and the gravel held the smell of it still, that mineral coldness, and the hedges on either side dripped in a slow, deliberate rhythm she found herself counting against her will. 1, 2. The iron under her hand was beaded with moisture. She did not let go of it. She had read the documents 4 times on the train. Ministry seal, dragon hide binding, the careful copper plate of a records clerk who had no idea what he was unmaking when he wrote her into this house. Subject: Granger, Hermione Jean. Corrected lineage following post-conflict disclosure of sealed paternity registers. And then the line that had stopped her breath in the carriage, that stopped it again now. Father of record, Malfoy Lucius Abraxas. There were words beneath it: illegitimate, concealed, a girl given away, a register sealed, a war that had pried open every locked drawer in Britain and let the truth fall out like moths. She was, the parchment said, a Malfoy. Found. Recovered. A daughter the family had lost and must now, by the joyless arithmetic of law and reputation, take back. Her body did not believe it. That was the thing she could not explain to anyone, the thing Harry had frowned at, and Ron had not even tried to understand. The facts arranged themselves into a tower, and she could not knock a single brick loose. Dates aligned, seals held. The blood quill registry was the most incorruptible instrument the wizarding world possessed. And still, standing here, every nerve in her stood up and said no in a voice older than reason. It was not grief. It was not even shock anymore. It was the low, persistent wrongness of a sound half a tone flat, the kind you feel in your teeth before you can name it. She pushed the gate. It gave without a sound. The drive was long, and the gravel was loud beneath her, that hollow, over-loud crunch of footsteps where there ought to be other sound, and there is none. No birds, no wind in the yews, only her own approach announcing itself to a house that had not asked for her. Peacocks watched from the lawn, white and unmoving, their eyes like seed pearls. The manor rose ahead, pale stone gone grey with the morning's wet, its windows giving back nothing. He was waiting on the steps. She saw him before he saw her, or before he chose to let her know he had. Draco Malfoy stood at the top of the stone stairs, with his hands behind his back and his chin slightly lifted, and the years since she had last seen him had pared him down to something harder and quieter. The boy who had sneered across a classroom was gone. What stood in his place was a man who had learned to hold very still, the way you hold still near something that might break if you move. He did not come down to meet her. She did not expect him to. Granger. His voice carried across the gravel, even and cool. Then, with a deliberateness that cost him something, she watched it cost him, watched the small muscle work at his jaw. He corrected himself. Or perhaps I meant to say something else now. Don't. It came out faster than she meant. Don't say it. A silence. The yews dripped. Somewhere a peacock shifted its weight with a dry rustle of feathers. As you wish, he said. She climbed the steps because there was nothing else to do, and with each one the distance between them shrank, and the air seemed to thicken, to take on a weight, a pressure she could not source, like the heaviness before a storm breaks, when the whole sky leans down on the back of your neck. By the time she reached the top, she was close enough to see that his eyes were not the flat grey she remembered. They were the colour of the wet stone behind him, and they were moving over her face with a quick, cataloguing attention he could not quite suppress, as if he too were checking the facts against something his body insisted on. "You don't believe it either," she said. It was not a question. It surprised her, coming out of her mouth. His expression did not change, which was itself an answer. "What I believe," he said, "is irrelevant. There's a seal on it. My father confirmed it." A pause, fractional. "Before he was taken back to Azkaban, he confirmed it." "And your mother?" Something flickered, there and gone. "My mother," he said, "has had a long time to learn not to be surprised by my father's secrets." The wind moved then, the first wind of the morning, and it carried to her the smell of the house. Cold stone, beeswax, the faint ghost of wood smoke from some fire burning deep inside, and under it all something she could not name, the particular scent of a place that has held grief for a long time without airing it out. She drew it in and felt the wrongness sharpen. "I'm not staying," she said. "You are," he answered, almost gently, and that gentleness was worse than cruelty would have been. "There's a process. There are people who will need to see you here, photographed here, presented. The ministry made it public for a reason. There's no quiet way through this. You're a found relative. The family receives the found relative." His mouth twisted, not quite a smile. "We perform the reunion. Then perhaps they'll leave you alone. And if I refuse?" "Then they write a different story about why the Malfoys won't have you, and you'll find that one follows you into every room for the rest of your life." He said it without heat, the way a man states the weather. "I'm not asking you to like it. I'm telling you how it goes." She hated that he was right. She hated more the small, treacherous part of her that was not thinking about the ministry or the photographs at all, that was thinking instead about how near he stood, and how the cold morning had brought colour high on his cheekbones, and how absurd, how unforgivable it was that she should notice such a thing about a man the parchment said was her brother. The word landed in her like a stone dropped down a well. Brother. She turned it over, and her whole self recoiled from it, not with the soft denial of disbelief, but with something sharper, a physical refusal, the way a hand jerks back from a stove before the mind has registered heat. And in the same instant, this was the part she would lie awake over, she saw an answering flinch cross his face, as though the word had been spoken aloud and had struck him too. "We should go in," he said. His voice had roughened very slightly. "Malfoy, don't." Now it was his turn. He looked away from her, out across the grey lawn and the watching birds, and his jaw set. "There's a long list of things I've made my peace with. Whatever this is. A gesture, economical, that took in the gates, the parchment she still pressed to her ribs, the impossible fact of her standing on his steps. I'll make my peace with it too. So will you. People do." "Do they?" He did not answer. He turned and pushed open the great door, and the hall beyond exhaled its cold breath at her, candlelight and shadow, and a black and white floor stretching away like a board game no one had won. She did not move. Granger. He stood in the doorway, half in light and half out of it, and for a moment, one single suspended moment, he simply looked at her, and the careful mask slipped, and what was underneath it was so raw and so confused and so unwilling that she felt it answer something in her own chest with a low, tactile hum, a tremor that started under the breastbone and would not be reasoned away. Then the mask came down. "Whatever you think you feel," he said, very low, very precise. "You don't. It's the strangeness of it. That's all. It passes." "You sound like you're reciting." His knuckles, where he gripped the edge of the door, had gone white. She watched the colour leave them. She watched him notice her watching and force the grip to loosen, finger by finger, until his hand lay flat and open against the dark wood. And the deliberateness of it told her more than any confession could have. "Come inside," he said. "You're letting the cold in." She crossed the threshold because the alternative was to stand on the steps forever. And as she passed him, the space between their shoulders narrowed to nothing, to a hand's breadth, to less, and she felt the warmth come off him through the cold air like the heat off a banked fire, and neither of them looked at the other, and both of them held their breath until the gap had opened again behind her, and the danger of the doorway was past. The door swung shut. The latch fell with a sound like a held breath let go. In the sudden dimness, she stood very still and let her eyes adjust, and she became aware of him beside her doing the same. Two people frozen in a vast cold hall, careful not to touch, careful not to look, the parchment between them in the air like a thing with weight. She thought, "I will find the flaw in it, whatever it costs. There is a flaw, and I will find it." She did not yet know how true that was, or what it would cost, or whose hand had drawn the line that named them kin. She only knew, standing in the candlelit dark of a house that did not want her, with the wrong name freshly stitched to her like a brand, that the thing rising in her chest at his nearness had no business being there at all, and that it was already, quietly, refusing to leave. Beside her, in the dark, she heard him draw a slow breath, as though he were about to speak. She turned toward the sound before she could stop herself. He did not speak. Whatever had risen in his throat in the dark of the hall, he swallowed it, and when the silence had stretched long enough to become its own kind of speech, he simply turned and walked, and she understood she was meant to follow. Their footsteps fell on the checkered marble and came back to them doubled, that flat, overlapping echo of a space too large for two people. And she watched his shoulders ahead of her, the rigid line of them, the way he held himself as though something inside might spill if he let it loosen. The manor unfolded around her in cold sequence. Corridors hung with portraits whose painted eyes tracked her with the slow insolence of the long dead. Doors of black wood, shut. A staircase that turned and seemed to climb past more floors than the house could possibly contain. He named nothing, explained nothing, only walked, and she catalogued it all because cataloguing was what she did when the ground moved under her. The tooth of cold in the air that the fires never quite drove out, the smell of beeswax and old paper, and beneath it that ineradicable trace of grief, the way the candle sconces threw their light upward so that every face, painted or living, wore its shadows in the wrong places. "This is yours," he said at last, stopping before a door no different from the others. He did not open it. "My mother had it made ready. There are things inside, clothes in the wardrobe. She guessed at your size." A pause. "She's good at that sort of thing. Anticipating what a guest will need before the guest knows to need it. It's a black family talent. It looks like kindness. And isn't it?" His hand was on the doorframe, and again she saw the knuckles tighten, the blood retreating from them, the small involuntary betrayal of a body holding something at bay. "It's control," he said. "The kindest version of it. But you'll find that out yourself. You find everything out, don't you? It's the one thing about you that hasn't changed." She might have taken it for an insult once. Now she heard the thing underneath it, that he had thought about what had changed in her and what hadn't, that he had a map of her in his head detailed enough to mark the constants. It unsettled her more than cruelty would have. She looked at him, and he looked back, and the corridor was very narrow, and the candlelight moved on his face, and the silence between them filled slowly with that low atmospheric pressure she had felt on the steps, the leaning weight of a sky about to break. "Dinner is at 8, he said, and stepped back, and the space between them opened, and she could breathe again. "My mother will expect you. Wear something she chose. It matters to her." He had already turned to go when he added, not looking back, "Don't go wandering. The house doesn't like strangers, and not all of the rooms are kind." Then he was gone, his footsteps diminishing down the turning stair, and she was alone with a door and a name that fit her like a borrowed coat. She did not unpack. She sat on the edge of the made bed in the cold blue light from the window and took the parchment out from against her ribs and read it a 5th time, and a 6th, looking for the seam, the loose thread, the place where the lie. She was certain now it was a lie, certain in the marrow, if not yet in the mind, had been stitched into truth. The blood quill registry could not be forged. Everyone knew that. It wrote what was true of a person's blood, and could write nothing else. It was the spine of every inheritance claim in the wizarding world, precisely because it could not be made to lie. And yet, I do not believe it, she thought, and I have never once in my life mistaken a feeling for a fact, and I will not start now. The dress Narcissa had chosen was the colour of dove's wings, soft and severe at once, and it fit her as though it had been cut to her own measurements, which unsettled her exactly as much as Draco had promised it would. She stood before the long mirror and did not recognize the woman in it, a Malfoy woman, pale and contained, the wild of her hair tamed into something the house would tolerate. And she felt the wrongness sharpened to a point, because the dress fit and the name did not, and a body could not be wrong about both. Dinner was held in a room built to humble. The table was long enough to seat 20, and they were 3, marooned at one end of it in a pool of candlelight, while the far reaches of the room dissolved into dark. Narcissa Malfoy sat at the head, straight-backed, luminous, her pale hair drawn up, her hands resting on the cloth with the stillness of a portrait. She watched Hermione come in with eyes that gave away nothing, and yet there was something in them. Hermione caught it and lost it. Something that was not welcome and was not hostility, and might, if she had had to name it, have been a kind of grief held under glass. You wore the grey, Narcissus said. Good. It suits you better than I hoped. A beat. You have your father's colouring around the eyes. Has anyone told you? The words were placed with terrible care. Hermione felt them land and felt Draco across the table go very still, saw his hand close around the stem of his glass, saw the knuckles whiten, the same tell, the same retreat of blood. He did not look at her. He looked at the candle between them, and the small flame doubled itself in his eyes. No one has told me anything true about my father, Hermione said, in some time. The silence after that was a living thing. Narcissa's expression did not so much as flicker, but something passed through the room all the same, a tension that drew tight across the table like a wire pulled to its tone, and Hermione understood that she had said more than she meant, and exactly what she meant at once. Draco's jaw worked. The flame stood straight in the windless room. You'll find, Narcissus said at length, lifting her glass with a hand so steady it was its own kind of confession, that truth in this family is a thing we ration, not from cruelty, from necessity. There are truths that, told too soon, do more harm than the lie they replace. She drank. She set the glass down without a sound. You will learn to live with the rationing, or you will make yourself very unhappy. Those are the only two roads through this house. I have walked the second. I do not recommend it. It should have been a warning. It felt strangely like a hand extended and withdrawn before it could be taken. They ate. The clink of silver on porcelain filled the silence, and the dark pressed in from the edges of the room, and Hermione became aware, with an attention she could not switch off, of every small motion Draco made across the table, the way he turned his glass a quarter turn between his fingers, the way he did not eat so much as move the food about, the way his gaze came to her and went away and came back, helpless, magnetic, drawn against his evident will, as though some current ran beneath the table and tugged at him whenever he tried to look elsewhere. She felt the same current. She despised herself for feeling it. He is my brother, she told herself, and her body, even as the word formed, rejected it with a clean and absolute refusal, the way the tongue rejects something gone bad. You're staring, he said, quietly, not unkindly. His mother had risen to speak with a house elf at the far door, and they were, for a moment, alone in the pool of light. So are you. His mouth tightened. It's the strangeness, he said again. The same recited words, the same defense built of borrowed lumber, and she heard now how little he believed them. It will pass. We'll get used to the shape of it. People get used to anything. You keep saying that, as though saying it enough will make it so. It's the only method I have. He set the glass down. His hand, she saw, was not quite steady, and he saw her see it, and the muscle leapt in his cheek. I've spent my whole life being told who the people around me are to me. Father, mother, enemy, aunt. I've never once been wrong about it, because the answer was always given to me before the question could form. He looked at her then, full on, and the candlelight made his eyes the colour of rained-on slate. And now there's a parchment that tells me what you are to me, and I read it, and every part of me that's ever known how to obey a label simply refuses, for the first time. It won't take. and I don't know what to do with a fact my own blood won't accept. It was the most honest thing he had said. It was, she realized, the most honest thing anyone had said to her since the owl came at dawn, and it had come from the last mouth on earth she would have expected it from, and it lodged in her chest like a splinter of warm metal, the bite of it sharp and not entirely unwelcome. "Then we're the same in that, at least," she said. Her voice had dropped to match his. "I don't accept it either, and I'm going to find out why I can't." Something crossed his face, alarm or hope, or the terrible meeting of the two. "Granger, there's a flaw in it." She leaned forward, and the candle's heat touched her face, and she did not care. "I don't know where yet, but the registry is wrong, or it's been made to be wrong, and I am very, very good at finding the place where a record and a truth fail to meet. You said it yourself. I find everything out." "And if there's nothing to find?" His voice had gone low and rough. "If you dig to the bottom, and the only thing waiting there is the same word you can't stand to hear, what then? You'll have spent yourself on it, and it'll still be true, and will still be." He stopped. He could not say it either. The word would not come from him any more than it would settle in her. "Then I'll know," she said, "and I'll have stopped pretending the not knowing is the same as peace." His hand had come to rest on the cloth halfway between them, pale against the dark linen, and she became aware of it the way you become aware of a held breath. And she became aware, too, that her own hand had drifted toward the center of the table without instruction from her, and that the distance between them had narrowed to a few inches of candlelit cloth, and that neither of them was looking at their hands at all, but only at each other, and that the air over the table had gone tight and humming with a static charge that had no name a brother and sister could speak. The door at the far end of the room opened. Narcissa's footsteps returned across the marble, unhurried, precise. Both hands withdrew. They withdrew at the same instant, as though pulled by a single string. And by the time Narcissa resumed her seat at the head of the table, there was a respectable foot of empty cloth between them, and two people looking studiously at their plates, and only the smallest tremor in Draco's fingers as he reached again for his glass to betray that anything had moved in the room at all. Narcissa looked at the space between them. She looked at her son's unsteady hand. She looked at the colour that had risen against every instruction in Hermione's face. And something in her own face closed like a door, softly, finally, the way a person closes a door on a room they have decided not to enter. And she lifted her glass, and her eyes, when they met Hermione's, held that grief under glass again, deeper now, and a warning that had nothing of welcome left in it. "Eat," she said, "both of you. It does no good to let it go cold." The storm came 3 nights later, and it came the way storms came to that part of the country, without preamble, the air thickening through the afternoon until the whole house seemed to hold its breath, and then the sky tearing open all at once over the yews. Hermione had not slept well since the owl came at dawn, and she did not sleep that night at all. She lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the rain throw itself against the glass in long shuddering sheets, and to the wind worry at the casements, and to the deep arterial groan of an old house bracing itself against weather. and when the lightning came, it printed the room in white for half a heartbeat, and left her seeing the shape of the window burned across the dark. The library, she thought. She had passed it that first evening, glimpsed the high shelves through a half-open door, and she had been thinking of it for 3 days, the way the thirsty think of water. The records would be there. The family trees, the registers, the long bloodline of the Malfoys set down in ink that did not fade. Somewhere in that room was the seam she was looking for. "Don't go wandering," he had said. "The house doesn't like strangers." She rose anyway. She had never in her life been able to leave a locked thing locked. The corridors were a country transformed by night. By day they had been merely cold. Now they were a dark river of stone, down which she moved with a single candle cupped against the draughts, and the flame threw her shadow, huge and wavering up the walls, so that she walked accompanied by a giant version of herself that mimicked her every step a beat behind. The portrait slept, or pretended to. The rain was everywhere, a vast, soft roar that filled the spaces between the thunderclaps. And when the lightning came, it found its way through every window at once, and turned the whole house briefly to silver, and then took the colour away again. She found the library by the smell of it before she found the door. That particular dry sweetness of a great deal of old paper kept in the cold, the tooth of aged parchment and leather and dust, a smell she would have known blindfolded in any country in the world. The door was unlocked. She slipped inside and pulled it to behind her, and stood for a moment, letting the room declare itself in the flickering light. Shelves that climbed into darkness, a gallery running round at the height of the second floor, a great cold hearth, and tall windows, down which the rain ran in unbroken sheets, so that the glass seemed to be dissolving. She did not hear him come in. That was the thing she would turn over afterward, that for all her watchfulness, she did not hear the door, did not hear his step, knew nothing until the lightning came and showed her, in its half-second of white, that she was not alone. He was standing across the room with the stormlight on him, and he was as still as the portraits, and his face, when the dark took it again, stayed printed on her eyes. The surprise on it, and beneath the surprise something stripped and unguarded that surprise had not had time to hide. "You don't sleep either," she said into the dark. Her voice came out lower than she intended. A pause. The rain filled it. "No," he said. "Not in this house. Not for years." She heard him move, the soft displacement of air, and when the next flicker came, he was nearer, and nearer again at the one after that, crossing the room toward her in stop motion, lit and dark and lit, until she could have reached out and touched the sleeve of him. "What are you looking for, Granger? At 2 a.m, in my family's records." "You know what? I know you think you'll find a forgery." His voice had the rough, soft texture of a thing said too quietly to be overheard, though there was no one to overhear. "I know you've decided the registry lied. I know that you're the sort of person who, told a door is a wall, will spend the rest of her life with her hands against the stone, feeling for the hinge." He was close now. The candle she held threw its small, warm light up between them, and she could see the storm in his eyes, the grey of them gone almost black in the dimness. "What I don't know is what you think you'll do with it, if you find it, if it's real. Be free of it, she said, and the word was out before she could weigh it, and it hung in the air between them with a terrible clarity, because free was a word that admitted everything. Free confessed the cage and named the wanting to be out of it, and she watched him hear it, watched it go into him. Free, he repeated. The candle trembled, her hand had trembled, and the light moved across both their faces. Of being my sister, that's the freedom you want. Don't. You said it, not me. His jaw was tight. She could see the muscle of it work in the small light. I've spent 3 days teaching myself to say the word, sister. I say it to myself in the mornings, like a man learning a foreign grammar. This is my sister. I am to feel for her as a brother feels. And every time I say it, something in me. He stopped. His hand had come up, she realized, half lifted between them, the long, pale fingers open, as though to take the candle from her, or to take her wrist, or to do some third thing he had not yet decided on. And it hung there in the dark, that hand, suspended between intention and refusal, trembling very slightly at the fingertips. The lightning came. In its sudden white, she saw everything at once, saw how close they had come without either of them deciding to, saw his hand a breath from her face, saw on his face the same naked want and the same horror at the want that she could feel arranging her own features. And then the dark came back and took the picture away and left only the heat of him, the warmth coming off his body through the cold air of the room, the sound of his breath gone ragged and uneven, the small sound her own breath made answering it. His fingers touched her cheek. It was the lightest thing, the back of 2 fingers laid against the curve of her face, hardly weight at all, and yet it went through her like the storm going through the house, a long shudder she could not stop, a current that started where his skin met hers and ran the length of her and left every nerve standing. She did not pull away. She told herself she should, and she did not. She felt the cold silver of the ring he wore turn against her jaw as his hand moved, the small hard bite of the metal a counterpoint to the warmth of his fingers, and she heard him make a sound low in his throat that was almost pain. "This is madness," he said. His voice had broken open. His thumb moved against her cheekbone. Once, the gesture of a man who has stopped governing his own hands. "Do you understand what they say you are to me? Do you understand what this is? It isn't true." She had not meant to say it. It came out of her on the breath, fierce and certain, her own hand rising now to close around his wrist, not to push it away, but to hold it where it was. "It isn't true, Draco. I would know. The blood would know. My blood doesn't believe it any more than yours does. And if you're wrong..." His forehead had come down toward hers. She could feel the warmth of his breath now on her mouth, could feel the whole tense, trembling length of him, a hair from her, held back by some last chord of will drawn to breaking. "If you're wrong, and the registry is right, and we let this, if we let it, then we'll have sinned," she said, "and I'll still want to, and so will you, and we'll know that wanting it didn't make us monsters, only unlucky, and I'd rather be unlucky than spend my life pretending I don't feel my own heart move when you come into a room." He kissed her, or he began to. His mouth came down and grazed the corner of hers, the barest catch of his lips against the edge of her lips, a fraction of a true kiss, the promise of one. And the heat of it and the wrongness of it, broke over them both in the same instant, like the thunder breaking overhead, and he tore himself back from her as though her skin had burned him. He stood 3 feet away with his chest heaving and his hand still half raised from where it had fallen from her face, and his eyes were wide and stricken in the lightning, and he was looking at her the way a man looks at the edge he has just stepped back from, with terror and with grief, and with a longing so undisguised that it was almost unbearable to witness. "No," he said, not to her, to himself, to the room, to the parchment and the seal and the long dead in their frames. "No, I won't, I will not do this to you. Whatever I am, I won't be that." His voice cracked down the middle of it. "You're a found relative. You came to this house wronged enough. I won't add this to the account. Draco, don't follow me." He was already at the door, already wrenching it open onto the dark corridor, and he stopped there with his hand white-knuckled on the frame, his back to her, his shoulders rigid against the stormlight. And for a moment, she thought he would turn around, thought the cord would snap and bring him back across the room to her, and her own hand had risen toward him without instruction, reaching across the cold, dark space between them. "Whatever you find in those records," he said, very low, not turning, "find it quickly. I don't know how long I can keep teaching myself the grammar." And then he was gone into the dark, and the door swung shut behind him, and the candle she held guttered low in the draught of his leaving and burned down again to a small, steady flame. And she stood alone in the great, cold room, with the rain dissolving the windows, and her own fingers pressed to the place on her cheek where the cold silver of his ring had bitten into her skin, and the warmth of him already fading from the air, and the taste of an almost kiss on the very corner of her mouth that she knew, with a certainty that frightened her more than any registry, she would not be able to forget. She did not go back to bed. She stayed in the library until the storm wore itself out toward dawn, and when the grey light came up at last in the dissolving windows, she was already at the long table with 3 registers open before her, and the place on her cheek where his ring had bitten had stopped aching and started to feel like a wound she did not want to heal. Work was the cure she reached for. It always had been. When the world tilted under her, and feeling threatened to drown the part of her that thought, she had learned long ago to put a problem between herself and the flood, a column of figures, a chain of logic, a record that could be checked. So she made herself a fortress of paper that morning and climbed inside it, and she told herself that what she was doing was the cold pursuit of truth, and not the desperate work of a woman trying to prove that the man who had nearly kissed her was not her brother. And the 2 motives ran so close together that she could no longer have separated them with a blade. The Malfoy genealogies were vast. They went back 9 centuries, and they were kept with a fanatical exactness, every union recorded, every birth, every death, the bloodline drawn out across the great vellum sheets in a hand that changed from generation to generation, but never lost its care. She found Lucius easily enough, his name set down in the copper plate of the last clerk, the line of his marriage to Narcissa Black ruled in beneath, and below that, alone, Draco. And then, in newer ink that had not had a century to settle into the page, a second line ruled in beneath Lucius, branching off to one side, and a name at the end of it that made her stomach turn over, even though she had known it would be there. Granger, Hermione Jean. Born September 19th, 1979. She put her finger on the date and held it there. It was wrong. Not the date. The date was hers. She had been born on that day. There was no question of it. What was wrong was the ink. She had spent enough hours of her life over old documents to read the age of a record the way a forester reads the age of a tree. And the line that joined her to Lucius Malfoy had not been ruled in 19 years ago when she was born, nor sealed and concealed for a war to uncover. It was fresh. The carbon black of it sat up on the surface of the vellum where old ink had sunk into the grain, and when she tilted the sheet to the grey window light, she could see the faint sheen of it, the way new ink shines where old ink has gone matte with time. Concealed, the ministry document had said. Sealed. But a sealed record did not change colour. A concealed line was a line drawn long ago and hidden. It was not a line drawn last month. She sat back. Her heart was going hard and high in her chest, and she made herself breathe, made herself doubt her own certainty the way she had been trained to, because a true scholar distrusts nothing so much as the conclusion she wants. You want it to be false, she told herself. Of course, the ink looks fresh to you. You want it to. And she nearly talked herself out of it. She nearly closed the register and went up to dress for breakfast and let the wanting damn the evidence. Then she turned the page and she found the thing that the wanting could not have invented. It was a clerk's annotation, a small note in the margin in a third hand, dry and administrative, the kind of remark a records officer makes to himself and forgets. Cross-reference seal 4471-B, Department of Mysteries, re-entered following recovery, and a date beside it. And the date was 3 weeks before the owl had come to her at dawn. Re-entered, not uncovered, not unsealed, re-entered. As though something had been taken out of the record and put back into it, altered in the weeks before the disclosure that had made her a Malfoy. She read it 4 times. She copied it onto a slip of paper in her own hand, the reference and the date both, and she folded the slip very small and put it inside her shirt against her ribs where the parchment had ridden for 3 days. And she felt the cold thrill of it go through her. Not joy. It was too soon and too frightening for joy, but the clean electric certainty of a hunter who has found the first true print in the mud and knows the quarry is real. She did not tell him. That was the decision she made over the cold breakfast they did not share. He sent word through a house elf that he was occupied. She understood it for what it was. A man who could not yet trust himself in a room with her after the library. And she turned the decision over all that long grey day and could not unmake it. She would not tell him, not yet, not on the strength of fresh ink and a clerk's marginal note. Because if she told him and she was wrong, she would have given him a hope built of nothing and watched it break him. And if she told him and she was right but could not prove it, the proof would matter more than ever, and the telling would only set them both running at a wall they could not yet bring down. Find it quickly, he had said. He had not said guess quickly. She would bring him the truth, or she would bring him nothing. But the not telling was its own kind of torment, and it built across the days that followed into something she had not anticipated. They could not avoid each other forever in a house that required them to perform. There were the photographs the ministry wanted, the formal portrait of the found family reunited. And there were the slow, obligatory dinners under Narcissa's watchful glass-grey eyes. And there was the simple geometry of two people living under one roof, who were each, at every hour, acutely and miserably aware of where in the house the other one was. She felt him through the walls. She would be reading and would know without sound that he had come into the corridor outside, and she would lift her head and wait, and the footsteps would pause at her door and go on, and she would let out a breath she had not known she was holding. The portrait sitting was the worst of it. The photographer arranged them. Narcissa seated, Draco standing at her shoulder, Hermione to her other side, and the man kept saying closer. If you would, a family ought to look like a family, and so they were made to stand close. Draco's arm obliged at last to come around her shoulders, his hand to rest at the curve of her upper arm, and they held the pose for the long minute the slow magical plate required. And Hermione stood rigid in the circle of his arm, with her face composed for the camera, and her whole body singing with the nearness of him, the warmth of his hand burning through the thin sleeve of her dress, the smell of him so close, cold air and cedar and the faint metal tang of the silver he wore, and she could feel, where his hand lay against her arm, the small fine tremor in his fingers that no composure could still. "Smile," the photographer said. "You've found each other. Smile as though you're glad of it." And they did. They turned their faces to the camera, and they smiled the smile of a brother and sister glad to be reunited. And it was the most monstrous lie Hermione had ever told with her body, because the thing she was glad of, standing in the warm circle of his arm, had nothing of a sister in it at all. And she knew from the rigidity of him, from the tremor in his hand, that the lie cost him exactly as much. When the plate was taken and they were released, they sprang apart, and Narcissa watched them spring apart, and her face did the thing it had done over the dinner table. Closed, softly, on a room she had decided not to enter. It was Narcissa who undid her own legend, in the end, not meaning to. Or perhaps Hermione could never afterward decide, meaning to in some buried way she would never admit, the way the body of a long silent woman will sometimes betray the truth her mouth has sworn to keep. It happened that same evening. The photographer had gone. The three of them sat in the smaller drawing room where a fire actually burned, and the talk had turned, as it sometimes did, to the past. And Narcissa, with a glass of wine warming in her hand and the firelight softening the careful planes of her face, spoke of the autumn Hermione had been born. She spoke of it idly, as an old woman speaks of a season long gone, and she said that it had been a hard autumn, that Lucius had been abroad through the whole of it, in France, on the long negotiation over the Beaubaton Concordat that had kept him out of the country from the August into the new year. The whole of it, from August into the new year. Hermione sat very still. The fire cracked. She did not move a muscle of her face, but inside her the slip of paper against her ribs seemed to burn, because she had been born on the 19th of September, in the deep middle of that autumn, And if Lucius Malfoy had been in France from August into the new year, then he had not been in England 9 months before her birth, nor at her birth, nor anywhere near the woman who bore her. And a man cannot father a child across the channel and a calendar both. She looked up. Draco was looking at her. He had heard it too. She watched the understanding move across his face, watched him do the same arithmetic she had just done, and arrive at the same impossible sum. And his eyes came up from the fire and found hers across the warm, dim room. And in them was a question so vast and so terrified and so wild with the first dangerous edge of hope that she could not answer it, could not so much as breathe. And his hand on the arm of his chair had gone white at the knuckle, gripping the wood as though it were the only thing holding him in the chair. Narcissa went on talking. She had not noticed. She was deep in the autumn of 1979, in the cold of that distant France, and she did not see her son's whitened hand, or the way her newfound daughter had stopped breathing, did not see the look that passed between the two of them across the firelight, the look of two people who have just heard, in an old woman's careless reminiscence, the first crack run clean across the foundation of everything they had been told to believe. They found each other in the corridor an hour later, when Narcissa had gone up and the house had settled into its night, and neither of them had needed to arrange it. He was simply there when she came out of the drawing room, waiting in the dark beyond the reach of the last lit sconce, and she went to him the way water finds the low place, without deciding to. "You heard?" he said. Low, urgent. There was no recitation left in him now, no borrowed grammar, no, "It's the strangeness, it will pass." France, from August, he wasn't here. I heard. It could be wrong. Her memory, it was 20 years ago. It wasn't wrong. She took the slip of paper from inside her shirt. She had carried it against her ribs for days now, warm from her skin. And she pressed it into his hand in the dark, and she felt his fingers close around it, and close, by accident, around hers, and neither of them pulled away. "There's more. I found it the first morning. The ink that joins me to your father is fresh, Draco. New. It was ruled into the register weeks before the ministry made it public, not 19 years ago. And there's a note, re-entered it says, re-entered following recovery, 3 weeks before the owl came to me. Someone took a record out and put a changed one back. This autumn. This year." She felt the breath go out of him. In the dark, she could not see his face, only feel the warmth of him and the sudden stillness, the way a man goes still when the ground he had braced himself to fall through turns out to hold. "Then it's a lie," he said. His voice had gone strange, hoarse, unsteady, a man saying a thing he had forbidden himself to hope. "Then we're not. I don't know yet." She made herself say it. It was the hardest thing she had said. "Fresh ink and a clerk's note, and your mother's memory of a French autumn. It's enough to be sure here." She pressed her free hand flat to her own breastbone. "It is not enough to be sure on paper. And it has to be sure on paper, Draco. Do you understand me? Because if we are wrong, if there is some explanation I haven't found, and we let ourselves believe, and then we act on the believing." She could not finish it. The thing they would have done, if they were wrong, did not have a word she was willing to put in the dark between them. "I know." His hand tightened on hers. I know what it would make us. I've thought of nothing else for a week. A long breath. But Granger, Hermione, her name from him, her own first name, with no surname's distance left in it. She felt it go through her like the ring against her jaw had gone through her in the library. If you're right, if you can prove it, then everything I've been hating myself for is... Don't say it. She did not want him to name the hope either. It was too new, too fragile. It would shatter if it was spoken too soon. Help me find the proof. That's all. Help me make it certain. And then, he agreed, and did not finish it either. And they stood a moment longer in the dark with their hands clasped between them and the slip of paper crushed warm in both their grips. Two people holding very still at the lip of a thing too large to look at directly. So began the strangest fortnight of her life, and, she would think later, the truest courtship she had ever had, though neither of them would have given it that name, conducted as it was entirely in the language of evidence. They were hunting a forgery now, the two of them together, and the hunt gave them what the prohibition had denied them, a reason to be in a room alone, heads bent over the same page, hands moving across the same vellum, a permission. They told themselves they were after the truth. They were. But the truth was only the alibi. What they were truly after, in the long evenings in the library with the single lamp burning and the cold coming up off the old stone floor, was each other, and the search let them have it in the one form they could still allow themselves. Proximity in the service of something other than desire. She taught him to read ink. He bent close over her shoulder while she tilted a register to the lamplight and showed him the sheen of new carbon sitting up on the page. And she was aware the whole time of his breath at her temple, of the warmth of his chest, a hand's breadth from her back, of how easy it would have been to lean the small distance into him. And she did not, and he did not close it. And the not closing was a thing they did together now, a held line, a discipline they shared like a secret. He knew the family's hidden places, and that was his gift to the hunt. He took her down to the vaults beneath the house where the older records were kept, the ones too sensitive or too shameful to keep on open shelves. And in a strongbox bound in dragon hide, he found the original of the marriage settlement between Lucius and Narcissa, and folded inside it, where no casual eye would ever have looked, the household accounts for the year of her birth. And there, in the ledger's dry columns, was Lucius's whole autumn written out in francs and lodging, and the long Beaubaton negotiation, August to January, every week of it accounted for on the wrong side of the channel, exactly as Narcissa had said. It corroborates her, Hermione breathed, her finger moving down the column. It's not just an old woman's memory now. It's written contemporaneously by his own clerks. He was in France the entire time. It's not enough. He said it, not her this time. He had learned her caution, made it his own. A man can be in France and still have fathered a child the spring before. The dates are tight, but they're not impossible. We need the thing itself. We need to find what was taken out of the register and what was put back and whose hand did it. He was right, and that he was right, that he had learned to think the way she thought, to distrust the conclusion they both ached for, moved her more than any sweetness could have. She looked up at him across the lamplit ledger, at the fine pale planes of his face thrown into relief by the low light, at the intensity in him that had nothing of the old coldness in it. And she felt the want rise in her so hard and so sudden that she had to look back down at the page to keep from doing something she could not yet undo. He saw it. She felt him see it. The air over the ledger went tight and humming the way it had over the dinner table, the way it had in the storm, and for a moment neither of them moved, and the lamp hissed, and the cold breathed up from the stone. "Hermione!" Very low. "We don't know yet," she said to the page. Her voice was not steady. "We can't, not until we're sure." "I know." But his hand had come to rest beside hers on the ledger, near enough that she could feel the warmth of it, not touching. "I'm only saying your name. I'm allowed to say your name." "You're not making it easier." "No," he agreed, and there was something almost like a smile in it, the first she had heard from him, rueful and dark and aching. "I find I don't want to make it easier. I've spent a week trying to feel less. I'm tired of it. If we have to wait for the proof before we can, then at least let me stop pretending the waiting doesn't cost me anything." She lifted her head and looked at him and let him see, for the first time without the mask of the hunt over it, exactly what the waiting cost her too. Let her face do the thing she had not allowed it to do since the owl came at dawn. And she watched the breath catch in him at the sight of it, watched his composure fracture, and the space between them over the open ledger seemed to charge and tighten until it was almost a substance, almost something she could have leaned her weight against. It was then that they found the last thing. Or rather, she found it, her eyes snagging on it even as the rest of her attention burned toward him. A discrepancy in the strongbox's own record, the inventory pasted inside the lid that listed what the box was meant to contain. Every item numbered in the old clerk's hand. The settlement, the accounts, a bundle of correspondence. And one further entry, the last on the list, scored through afterward with a single line of newer ink, as though to cancel it. A document numbered, sealed, and described in 4 dry words that stopped her heart in her chest where it had been racing toward him a moment before. G. Disposition of child. "Draco." Her voice had changed. He heard it change and went still. "Look, the inventory. There was a 5th document in this box, and someone struck it from the list." She put her finger beneath the cancelled line, beneath the 4 words and the angry rule of fresh ink drawn through them. "Disposition of child. G. Granger. Me. There was a record of what was done with me, and it was kept in your father's most private vault, sealed for 19 years. And then, this autumn, someone took it out and crossed it off the list, so it would seem it had never been here at all." He leaned in over the inventory, and his shoulder came against hers, and neither of them noticed, or both of them noticed, and neither moved, because the thing on the page had swallowed everything else. She felt him reading the 4 words. She felt the moment he understood what they meant, that her arrival in this house had not been a discovery, but a delivery, that someone had not found a lost daughter, but disposed of one long ago, and amended the books this autumn to make the disposal look like a finding. And she felt his whole body go rigid against hers, and his hand came down flat on the page beside the cancelled line, and the knuckles of it went white, bone white, the blood driven clean out of them. "Where is it?" he said. His voice had gone very quiet and very terrible, the quiet of a man who has just understood that the lie he has been hating himself inside of was built on purpose by a hand he knew. The document. If it was taken from this box, it didn't leave the house. Father never let anything leave the house. "Where is it? Hermione?" And he was already turning, already reaching for the lamp. The search in him transformed in an instant from a careful sifting into something with teeth, and his hand closed hard around her wrist to pull her up with him toward the dark stairs and the rooms above where the rest of the truth was waiting. And the grip of his fingers on her wrist was the first time he had touched her since the library, and the heat of it ran up her arm and into her chest, even as the cold dread of what they were about to find ran down it, and she rose into the pull of him without a word, and the lamp swung wild shadows up the vaulted stone as they climbed. The document was in Lucius's study, of course. It would be nowhere else. The room had been kept exactly as he left it the day they took him back to Azkaban, locked and dust-sheeted and forbidden, a shrine to a man neither of them mourned, and Draco's hand shook as he worked the wards that held the door. Old wards, blood-keyed, that knew him for a Malfoy, and let him pass with a reluctance she could feel as a pressure against her skin. The study smelled of cold ash and the particular mustiness of a room sealed against the living. The lamp threw their shadows up across shelves of dark books and a great desk and a portrait draped in black cloth that she was grateful had been covered. Draco went straight to the desk. He knew the house the way she knew a library. He knew where a man like his father would hide a thing. He meant never to be found, and his hands moved over the desk's edges and underside with a grim certainty, until something gave with a soft wooden click, and a shallow drawer she had not seen slid out from beneath the writing surface. Inside, it was a single document, sealed, numbered, exactly as the cancelled inventory line had promised. He did not open it at once. He stood holding it in both hands in the lamplight, and she watched the dread and the hope war in his face, and she understood that he was afraid, that the man who had pulled her up the stairs with teeth in his urgency had arrived at the thing itself and found he could not break the seal, because the seal still held the question undecided, and once it was open, the answer would be whatever it was, and could not be unmade. "Give it to me," she said gently. "If it's terrible, let it be my hands that found it terrible." He gave it to her. The trust in the gesture undid her a little. She broke the seal. It was written in Lucius Malfoy's own hand. She knew the hand from the registers now, the cold, elegant copper plate of a man who never once doubted his right to arrange the world. And it was dated the autumn she was born, 19 years before. And it was not the record of a daughter found. It was the record of a daughter unmade. She read it once swiftly, her eye flying down the page, and the whole monstrous architecture of the thing assembled itself in her mind even as she read, and she had to put her hand on the edge of the desk to keep upright, because it was worse than she had let herself imagine, and it was wholly, coldly deliberate, and it had nothing to do with blood at all. "Tell me," Draco said. He had gone very still. Whatever it is, tell me. She told him. There was a woman, the letter named her, a witch of no great family, a clerk in the Department of Mysteries 19 years ago. A woman who had worked the deep registers where the bloodlines and the prophecies and the long secrets of magical Britain were kept. And there had been a child, not Lucius's child. The letter was perfectly, chillingly clear on that point, clearer than any blood quill, because Lucius had no interest in claiming a child he had not fathered. The child was the woman's own, by a man the letter did not deign to name, and the woman had given the child away, as women without family or means sometimes had to, into the Muggle world, to a couple in a city far from any of this, a dentist and his wife who had wanted a daughter and could not have one. "That's me," Hermione said. Her voice had gone very flat and far away, the voice of a woman reading her own life off a page for the first time. "I'm the child. My mother, the woman who gave me up, she worked in the Department of Mysteries. She gave me to the Grangers. That part is true. That part was always true. I am adopted. I have always known I was adopted, and that much of the story they told me was real." "Then how?" Draco's hand had come to her shoulder, gripping it, holding her up or holding himself up. She could not tell. "How does my father come into it? If you're not his, because of what my mother knew." She read it again to be sure, and the second reading made her cold all the way through. She worked in the deep registers. She knew things. The letter doesn't say what. It's careful not to say. But it says she had become inconvenient, that she had learned something she should not have learned, and that she had threatened to make it known. "And your father." Hermione's voice did not break, but it went thin, stretched to its edge. "Your father didn't kill her. That would have been a death to investigate. He did something cleverer. He had her records altered. He had her made into a different woman entirely, discredited, declared unstable, her testimony rendered worthless. And to do that, he needed to reach into the deep registers and rewrite a life, and a person whose origins have been rewritten can be made to seem anything at all. And the child she had given away was a loose thread, a daughter who might one day come looking, who might one day be believed. So he..." She stopped. "So, he buried you," Draco said. The words came out of him in a low, ruined voice. "He buried the thread. He sealed the record of who you really were and where you'd gone, and he kept it in his vault for 19 years against the day it might be needed." "Yes. And this autumn." His hand tightened on her shoulder until it hurt, and she was glad of the hurt. It was something to hold on to. "This autumn, the war broke everything open. The sealed registers. The Department of Mysteries' deepest records. They were disclosed, weren't they? The post-war transparency. Everything sealed, dragged into the light. He must have known my mother's old colleague's daughter was about to surface in the disclosures. The real record, the truth of who you were and what was done to your mother. And he couldn't let that out. So, he replaced it. The full shape of it was clear to her now, and it was so elegant and so cruel that she almost admired it, the way one admires the precision of a trap that has just closed on one's own leg. He couldn't make the disclosure not happen, but he could control what was disclosed. He reached into the registers one last time, re-entered the clerk's note said, this autumn, and he rewrote me again. He took the loose thread that might unravel his crime, and he tied it to himself. He made me his daughter, his illegitimate, recovered, blood-confirmed daughter. Because who would ever go looking behind that story? A Malfoy bastard is a scandal, not a mystery. The world would gossip about the byblow and never once think to ask what the byblow's true mother had known. He didn't make me his daughter to claim me, Draco. He made me his daughter to bury me a second time, to make my real origin unfindable behind a more interesting lie. The silence in the dead study was total. The lamp hissed. Somewhere far below the house, a clock she had never heard struck the half hour with a single deep note. And the rest of it, Draco said at last, and his voice had changed again. It had gone quiet and dangerous, and very, very controlled. The voice of a man holding a great rage very still, so that he could think over the top of it. The part where it meant we could never. The part where it put a wall between us that neither of us could climb. Did he plan that too? Or was that only luck? She had been afraid of this question. She had seen it coming from the moment she understood the rest, and she had hoped he would not ask it, and she was not surprised that he had, because he was not a man who could leave a thing half known any more than she was. I don't know yet, she said carefully. There's nothing in the letter about us. He wrote this 19 years ago. He couldn't have known then that you and I would... She could not say it. He couldn't have known. So either it's chance that the lie he chose to bury me with happened to be the one lie that would also forbid us to each other. Or he chose it this autumn, knowing exactly what it would do. Draco had gone white. He confirmed it from Azkaban, Hermione, with his own mouth. Yes, she is my daughter. I sat across a table from him, and he looked at me when he said it. He looked at me. His hand left her shoulder and went to the edge of the desk and gripped it, and the knuckles drained white, and she watched him understand the thing he had not let himself understand until now. He knew. He saw something that day, or he guessed it. He was always good at finding the soft place in a person, and he understood that making you my sister wouldn't only bury your mother's secret. It would take from me the one thing he could still take. He couldn't have known we'd feel it, but once he suspected we might, it would have delighted him. A second cruelty for free. Bury the witness and break the sun in the same stroke of the pen. His whole body was rigid now with a fury so complete it had gone past heat into a kind of glacial stillness. And she watched his hand on the desk's edge and thought it might break the wood. She put her own hand over it, the first time she had touched him by her own choice since the storm, and she felt the white-knuckled rigidity of it under her palm. And slowly, slowly, under the warmth of her hand, she felt the grip begin to loosen. Then we take it from him, she said quietly. The cruelty. We don't let him keep it. We prove what he did. To my mother, to me, all of it. And we tear the lie down to the last sheet of vellum, and when it's down, there's no wall left standing. He built it to forbid us. We pull it apart and we walk through the place where it stood. Her hand tightened over his. But it has to be airtight, Draco. This letter is his confession in his own hand, but he'll say it's forged. He'll say, I made it. And there's a registry with a ministry seal that says, I'm his blood. We have to be able to prove the registry itself was tampered with, re-entered, falsified, or it's only our word against the law, and the law has a seal on it. Then we find the proof of the tampering, he said, and turned his hand under hers so that their palms met, so that his fingers closed around hers and held them openly. The first deliberate clasp neither of them pretended was anything but what it was. Together, to the end of it, and when it's torn down. He stopped. He looked at their joined hands in the lamplight, and then he looked at her, and the rage in him had given way to something else entirely, something raw and unguarded and long forbidden. And his voice, when it came, was barely above the hiss of the lamp. When it's torn down, Hermione, I am going to do the thing I've been forbidding myself since the day you walked up my steps, and I am not going to be sorry for it, and neither are you. No, she agreed, and her own voice had gone unsteady, and her hand turned in his and gripped it back. I won't be sorry, but not until it's down. I won't have it be a thing we stole. When you... Her face warmed. She made herself say it. When you do the thing you've been forbidding yourself, I want it to be allowed. I want there to be no seal in the world that says it isn't. His thumb moved once across the back of her hand, and the lamp guttered in a draught from the dead man's study. And in the wavering light, she saw him lift their joined hands very slowly toward his mouth, his eyes on hers the whole time, asking, and she did not pull away, and his lips had just brushed the bones of her knuckles. The barest warmth, the ghost of the kiss they were both still refusing. When somewhere below them in the sleeping house, a door opened, and Narcissa's voice, clear and cold and wide awake, called up the dark stairwell. Whatever the two of you have found in his study, and I have known for an hour that you were in it, you had far better come down and let me tell you the rest of it myself. She was waiting for them in the smaller drawing room where the fire still burned, seated very straight in her chair with a glass untouched at her elbow and her pale hair down for the night. And she looked, in the low light, older than Hermione had ever seen her. Not frail. Narcissa Malfoy would never be frail, but worn, as though the keeping of a thing for 19 years had finally grown too heavy to carry up the stairs to bed. Sit, she said, both of you, and let go of each other's hands before you do, not because it offends me, it does not, but because you will need them steady for what I am going to tell you, and you cannot hold a thing steady while you are holding a person. They let go. They sat. The fire cracked and threw its red light up the walls, and Narcissa looked from her son to the woman the world had called her stepdaughter, and something in her face that had been closed for weeks, closed since the first dinner, opened at last like a hand unclenching. You found the letter, she said. It was not a question. The disposition, so you know the shape of it. You know she is not Lucius's child. You know what was done to the mother and to the daughter, and why. Her eyes moved to Hermione. What you do not know, what the letter does not say because he was too careful ever to write it down, is that I knew the woman, your mother. I knew her before any of this. We were girls together, in a manner of speaking. She was a clerk, and I was a black, and the world did not permit us to be friends. But we were, in the small ways the world's permissions can be got around. She was clever, cleverer than any of us. It was her cleverness that killed her in the end. She's dead, Hermione said. She had not let herself ask it until now. Many years dead. I'm sorry. I would have told you that more gently if there had been a gentler way, but there is not, and you are not a woman who wants things softened. Narcissa's hands tightened on the arms of her chair and loosened again. She learned something she should not have. In the deep registers, a thing about the war that was coming, and about who would profit from it, and your Lucius. The yaw was bitter, aimed at her absent husband across 19 years. Lucius was among those who would profit, and she had the proof, and she was going to bring it into the light. So he ruined her, not with a curse, with a pen. He had her unwritten, discredited, declared unstable, her every record altered until the woman who had the proof no longer existed, and only a mad woman remained who could be safely ignored. And then, because the proof might still surface through her, he buried the one living thread that connected to her, the child she'd given away. Me. You? Narcissa looked at her steadily. I knew she had a daughter. I knew she had given the child to a Muggle family for the child's own safety before any of the rest of it happened. She did it out of love. You must understand that. She gave you away to keep you out of a world she already knew was turning dangerous. And when Lucius decided to bury the thread, I knew it was you he meant. A girl somewhere in the Muggle world with her mother's cleverness and no idea what she was. I told myself there was nothing to be done. I told myself the child was safe precisely because she was buried, because the world had forgotten her, and that to go looking for you would only be to draw his eye back to you. So I said nothing. For 19 years I said nothing, and I watched you grow up at a distance. Oh yes, I knew which child you were, the brilliant Muggle-born girl at the school, the one my son could not stop complaining about. And I held my tongue, because silence was the only protection I had to give you. That is the thing I have been carrying. That I knew who you were, and what had been done to your mother. And I let you walk into this house under a name I knew to be a lie. Because to tell you the truth too soon would have been to put you in his reach again. The fire cracked. Draco had not moved. He was staring at his mother with a stillness that Hermione had learned to read now, the stillness of a man holding something very large at bay. And when he spoke, his voice came out low and even and terrible. And the seal he put on it this autumn, the new lie, making her my sister. He paused. Did you know about that too? Narcissa met his eyes. I knew he had done something with the disclosures. I knew when the Ministry's owl came naming her a Malfoy that he had reached out from his cell and rewritten her one last time to keep the deep truth buried behind a shallow scandal. I did not know. And here, for the first time, her perfect composure showed a fracture, a hairline crack across the porcelain of her face. I did not know he had chosen that lie. The sister. I did not understand why, of all the ways he might have buried her, he chose the one that would make her your kin, until I saw the two of you at my own dinner table, reaching across the cloth for each other and snatching your hands back as though the linen had teeth. Her voice dropped. And then I understood. He saw it in you, Draco, when you visited him. He has always been able to find the one place a person is soft. He saw that you... She did not finish the sentence and did not need to. And he reached for the cruelty with both hands, to bury the witness and unmake his son's one chance at something he himself never had. He made her your sister so that you would have to spend your life beside the one person you wanted and forbidden to ever have her. That is the man I married. That is the price he set, and the two of you have been paying it for weeks, and I have watched you pay it and said nothing, because I did not see a way to tell you that would not break the protection your ignorance gave you. It isn't protection anymore, Hermione said quietly. He can't reach me now. The disclosures are done. There's nothing left for the lie to hide. We've found the letter, we found the accounts, we know my mother's name and what was done to her. The only thing the lie protects now is him, his crime, and his last cruelty to your son. She leaned forward into the firelight. Narcissa, help us tear it down. You're the only living person who knew my mother, who can testify to who she was before he unwrote her. With the letter and the ledgers and your word, we can prove the registry was falsified. We can have it struck, the blood claim voided, the whole thing undone in the open where he can't reach to mend it. We can clear my mother's name. And we can... She glanced at Draco, and her face warmed, and she did not look away from it. We can take from him the last thing he tried to take. For a long moment, Narcissa Malfoy said nothing. She looked at the two of them in the firelight, her son and her old friend's daughter, sitting forward in their chairs toward a freedom that her husband had built a wall to deny them. And something moved through her face that Hermione had seen before and finally understood. That grief under glass, that thing she had taken at the first dinner for a warning. It had not been a warning. It had been recognition. Narcissa had looked at her across that table and seen her old friend's daughter and her own son falling toward her, and the cruelty of the trap her husband had set. And she had had to keep her face closed over the knowledge of all of it, because she had not yet found a way to set it free. My husband, Narcissa said at last, and her voice had gone cold and clear and final, has taken a great many things from me in 25 years, and I have let him, because there was always a reason: the family, the boy's safety, the name. He is in Azkaban now, and there is no longer any reason to let him take anything at all. She rose from her chair, and in the firelight she was suddenly not worn but formidable, a black of the old blood drawn up to her full height. I will give you my testimony. I will give you her name and her history and everything I remember of what was done to her, and I will say it under oath to the Wizengamot if I must, and let the world make of it what it likes. He buried 2 women with that pen. I am going to dig them both up. She looked at Hermione, and the glass over the grief had gone entirely, and what was underneath it was fierce and warm and 19 years overdue. Your mother's name was Aurelia. She would have been proud past speaking of the woman you've become, and she would have liked you for my son. She told me once she hoped her daughter would marry for nothing but love, since she herself never had the chance. And I have spent these weeks watching her wish come true at my own table and being forbidden by my own husband to say so. The word marry sat in the room like a coal off the fire, bright and impossible and warming, and Hermione felt it land in her chest, and she could not look at Draco, and she looked at him anyway, and found him already looking at her with an expression stripped entirely bare, the last of the recitations and the borrowed grammar, and the teaching himself to say the word burned clean away, and only the wanting left, and the wanting was no longer a sin. was only hours now from being said aloud in the open, and it was almost more than either of them could sit still inside of. "It isn't proven yet," Hermione said, to the room, to herself, to the dangerous brightness of the coal. Her voice was not steady. "Tomorrow. We take it all to the ministry tomorrow. The letter, the ledgers, your testimony. We have the registry struck in the open. And until the seal is broken and the law itself says there was never any blood between us, I won't—" She made herself say it, looking at him. "We won't. I want it clean, Draco. I want it true on paper, and true in the world, and true in front of the people who tried to make it a lie. One more night." "One more night," he agreed, low, and his hands had curled into fists on his knees with the effort of agreeing, the knuckles paling, and she watched him hold himself in his chair by main force, and she loved him for the holding. And Narcissa watched the two of them strain against the last hours of a wall already crumbling, and let out a breath that might, in a less composed woman, have been something close to a laugh. "Go to bed," Narcissa said gently, "separately. You've waited 19 years, and you don't know it. You can wait until morning. I will have the carriage ready at first light, and I will come with you, and we will end this in the open as she would have wanted it ended." She moved toward the door and paused there, her hand on the frame, and looked back at them once more in the firelight. "And tomorrow, when it is done, when the seal is broken and the law has said what is true, I will not be in the house until evening. I find I have a great deal of business in town, a very great deal. It may take all day." The ghost of something crossed her face, dry and knowing and kind. "Do not waste it." And she was gone up the dark stairs, and the two of them were left alone in the firelight with one night between them and the breaking of the wall, sitting very still in their separate chairs, with their fists clenched and their eyes locked across the warm red dark, and the air between them gone so tight and so charged that it seemed the smallest motion would discharge it like lightning, and neither of them moved, and the fire burned down, and somewhere far above them the house held its breath through the last hours of a lie that had stood for 19 years and would not see another nightfall. The ministry was loud after the long quiet of the manor, and it was strange to carry so private a wound into so public a place. But Hermione had learned that the only way to defeat a thing built in secret was to drag it into the loudest room you could find and make it stand up in the light. It took the whole of the morning and most of the afternoon. There was a records officer, and then a senior records officer, and then a member of the Wizengamot's review panel summoned down to the cold examination room, where they laid it all out across a long table. The letter in Lucius's hand, the household ledgers with their French autumn, the strongbox inventory with its cancelled line, and Narcissa Malfoy, seated very straight in her travelling cloak, giving her testimony in a clear, unhurried voice that did not falter once. Hermione watched the officials' faces change as the architecture assembled itself in front of them. She watched the moment the senior records officer tilted the register to the window light, exactly as she had taught Draco to do, and saw the new ink shining up off the page where old ink had sunk into the grain, and went very pale, because a falsified blood registry was not a scandal. It was the foundation of the ministry cracking under its own feet, and a man who could reach from Azkaban and rewrite the incorruptible registers was a man the new transparent ministry could not afford to have existed. "The seal will be struck," the panel member said at last, removing her spectacles, her voice flat with the particular exhaustion of an official who has just been handed a great deal of work. "The blood claim is void. The original record of your parentage," she looked at Hermione, not unkindly, "will be restored to the disclosures, your mother's name and history along with it, and the discrediting of her testimony reviewed. There will be charges added to your father's account, Mr. Malfoy. Forgery of a blood registry is not a small thing. It may be the largest thing he is yet answerable for." She gathered the documents into a folder and sealed it with her own mark. "You are not, and have never been, related by blood to this family. I'm sorry for what was done to you, both of you. The law was made an instrument of it, and the law owes you the correction." It was over in a sentence, 19 years and 4 weeks, and it ended in a flat administrative sentence in a cold grey room, and Hermione signed where she was told to sign, and the seal that had named her a Malfoy was struck through in front of her with a single line of the panel member's ink. And she watched that line drawn, the same gesture that had cancelled the inventory entry, the same single stroke, and felt it cut the wall down to the ground. She did not look at Draco. She could not in that room, not with the officials watching, and her mother's name being restored to the world's records a yard from where she sat. But she felt him beside her the whole time, felt the held tension in him, felt the moment the panel member said, "You are not and have never been," go into him like a key turning in a lock that had been jammed for weeks. And she heard the small, unsteady breath he let out, and she had to press her own hands flat on the cold table to keep from reaching for one of his right there in front of the Wizengamot. Narcissa rose. She thanked the officials with the cool grace of her line, and she gathered her cloak, and she walked the two of them out through the loud, bright atrium where witches and wizards hurried past with no idea that a 19-year-old crime had just been undone in the room behind them. And at the Floo gates, she stopped and turned to them, and her face had the dry, knowing kindness it had worn the night before. "It is done," she said. "Your mother has her name back, and you have yours, and he has lost the last thing he reached for." She drew on her gloves, finger by finger, with the unhurried precision that was so much a part of her. "I have, as I mentioned, a very great deal of business in town. I do not expect to be home before dark. The house will be empty." A pause, the smallest possible lift at the corner of her mouth. "Aurelia hoped her daughter would marry for love. I have done what I can toward it. The rest is not a mother's business." And she stepped into the green flame and was gone, and left the two of them standing at the gates of the ministry with the walls struck down between them and an empty house waiting at the other end of the Floo, and nothing, for the first time in their lives, nothing at all standing in the way. They did not speak on the journey back. They could not. The words had grown too large for the saying. They came out of the great fireplace into the cold hall of the manor, one after the other, and stood in the checkered dimness with the door shut behind them, and the house silent and empty around them. and the same hall that had held its breath the first morning held its breath again. But it was a different breath now, charged with something that had nothing of dread in it, only the unbearable nearness of a thing too long forbidden. And now, suddenly, by the stroke of an official's pen, aloud. He turned to her. The afternoon light came grey through the tall windows and laid itself across the planes of his face, and he looked at her the way he had looked at her in the storm-lit library, stripped and unguarded, except that now there was nothing he had to teach himself, no grammar to recite, no word to swallow, and the absence of the prohibition had left him looking almost lost. A man who has braced his whole weight against a door for weeks and felt it suddenly swing open. "It struck," he said. His voice was low and not quite steady. "You heard her. Not, and have never been. There's no seal left in the world that says—" He stopped. He took a step toward her across the cold marble, and she did not move, and the held tension between them drew so tight it sang. "I've been waiting to do something for a long time, longer than I knew. I think I've been waiting since you walked up the steps and told me not to say the word. And I think part of me knew even then that the word was wrong, that my own blood would never believe it. And I've spent every day since holding myself back from this against a wall I hated. And the wall is down, Hermione. And I find I don't know how to begin now that I'm allowed." "You begin," she said, and her own voice had gone unsteady, and she closed the last of the distance herself because she could not bear to make him cross it alone. "The way you almost began in the library, except this time you don't stop." He lifted his hand to her face, the way he had in the storm, the back of 2 fingers laid against the curve of her cheek, the cold silver of his ring turning against her jaw, the same gesture exactly, the one he had torn himself away from. And this time he did not tear himself away. This time his fingers slid back into her hair, and his palm came warm against her cheek, and he tilted her face up to his with a slowness that was almost unbearable, his eyes searching hers for the last possible heartbeat, as though even now, even with the seal struck and the house empty, and her own face turned up to his, he could not quite believe he was permitted. And she answered the question in his eyes by rising onto the balls of her feet and closing the final fraction of space herself. He kissed her. Not the grazed corner of a mouth, not the ghost of a thing snatched back. He kissed her fully, his mouth coming down on hers with all the held weeks behind it, and the warmth of it broke over her like the storm had broken over the house, like the thunder, like everything they had been smothering let go at once. And she made a sound against his mouth that she had never made in her life, and felt him answer it, felt his arm come around her and gather her in against him, so that there was no space left between them at all, no cloth, no parchment, no wall, only the warmth of his chest against hers, and the unsteadiness of his breath, and the long shudder that went through both of them at the same instant, as though they were one body finally permitted to feel what it had been forbidden to feel. She had braced herself, somewhere in the back of her mind, for it to be diminished by permission, for the want to lose its edge once the prohibition that had sharpened it was gone. It was the opposite. Freed of the terror, the wanting only opened wider, ran deeper, because there was nothing to flinch from now, nothing to snatch back, no part of her on guard against the thing she felt, and so all of her could feel it at once. And it was enormous. It was the whole of her. And she pressed up into the kiss with her hands fisting in the front of his shirt, and felt him gather her closer still and walk her back without breaking from her, until her shoulders met the cold stone of the wall, and the chill of it ran up her spine in delicious contrast to the heat of his mouth. He broke from her, only to breathe, his forehead coming down against hers, both of them shaking, his hand still cradling her face, his thumb moving across her cheekbone in the gesture she had felt in the storm and longed for ever since. 19 years, he said against her mouth, ragged, almost laughing, almost weeping. He stole 19 years from us before we even knew each other, and 4 weeks more after, and made me hate myself for the one true thing I've ever felt. And it was a lie, the whole of it, a lie drawn in fresh ink to bury a crime, and you tore it down, you and your impossible refusal to leave a locked thing locked. I told you there was a flaw in it. She was laughing too, helplessly, her hands still fisted in his shirt as though she would never let go of it. I told you the first morning. I said I'd find the place where the record and the truth failed to meet. You did. You always do. He kissed her again, softer now, slower, a kiss with no fear under it at all, and she felt the difference of it go all the way through her. This was not the desperate breaking loose of the first one, but something deeper and more certain. A man kissing a woman he intended to go on kissing, unhurried now, because for the first time there was all the time in the world. He drew back just enough to look at her, and the grey eyes that had been the colour of wet stone and rained on slate were now simply warm, simply hers. And he said, very low, the thing she had wanted to hear and had not let either of them say until the wall was down. I love you. I've loved you since before I had a word for it that wasn't the wrong one. And there's no seal in the world that says I can't, and I am never, as long as I live, going to teach myself not to again. She opened her mouth to answer him, to say it back, the thing that had been growing in the dark under the prohibition until it had filled her entirely, the thing she had finally been given leave to feel out loud. And she got as far as his name, got as far as drawing the breath to say the rest of it, when he kissed the words off her lips before she could finish them, gathering her up off the cold stone and into the warmth of him. And the answer she had meant to speak became something she said with her whole body instead, pressed against him in the grey light of the empty hall, in the house that had been built to keep them apart and had failed. Spring came late to that part of the country, and when it came to the yews first, a green so new it looked wet, and Hermione stood at the window of what had once been Lucius Malfoy's study, and watched it arrive and thought about how much could change in the turning of a single season. The study was not Lucius's anymore. They had stripped it in the first weeks. The dust sheets, the shrouded portrait, the desk with its hidden drawer that had held the disposition of a child. Draco had wanted to burn the desk. She had argued for keeping it because she was a historian to the marrow and could not bear to destroy a thing that had held a truth, even a buried one. And so the desk remained, but the room around it had been remade entirely. The dark books cleared out and her own carried in. the heavy drapes taken down so that the late light could reach the floor. It was her study now, their study. The portrait of Lucius had been taken down to the cellars where it could rail at the dark, and in the bright place where it had hung there was instead a small framed photograph, the only one that existed, of a clever-faced woman with Hermione's own eyes. Aurelia, recovered from the deep registers along with her name, her testimony, her vindicated proof. Your mother had her name back. Narcissa had seen to it that the photograph was found and given to her daughter's daughter, and Hermione looked at it every morning, at the woman who had given her a way out of love and been unwritten for her cleverness, and waited 19 years in a sealed register to be dug up, and she thought, I found you. In the end, I found you. The trial had been swift and very public. The falsified registry was a thing the ministry could not afford to be quiet about, and so Lucius Malfoy's last and cleverest cruelty had become his most public ruin. Forgery of a blood registry, perversion of the deep records, the unwriting of an innocent woman, all of it laid out before the Wizengamot, with Narcissa rising to give her testimony in a voice that did not shake and a face that did not forgive. He had said it was forged, exactly as Hermione had predicted he would. The fresh ink had answered him. The ledgers had answered him. His own wife had answered him. And there had been a moment, she was told. She had not been able to watch, but Draco had watched and told her afterward in the dark. A moment when Lucius had looked across the courtroom at his son and understood that the boy he had tried to break by forging him, a sister had instead married the woman, was going to marry her, that the cruelty had not only failed, but reversed itself in his hands. And the look on his face, Draco said, had been worth 19 years. He thought he was taking the last thing from me, Draco had said, his arm around her in the dark of their bed, his voice low and wondering. And instead, he handed you to me. He made you family, so I could never have you. And the lie was so total that when it broke, there was nothing left between us at all. No history of enmity that mattered. No house against house. He'd already burned all of that down himself, trying to build the wall. He cleared the ground for us and didn't know he was doing it. A dry breath that was almost a laugh. I'd thank him if I didn't hate him so completely. They were to be married in the early summer, in the gardens, when the roses Narcissa had planted came in. It was Narcissa who had insisted on it. Narcissa who had become, over the spring, something neither of them had expected. Not a mother to Hermione, that word was taken, but something adjacent to it, fierce and dry and unexpectedly tender. A woman making up for 19 years of enforced silence by saying, now, every kind thing she had been forbidden to say. She had cried exactly once at the engagement and had been furious with herself for it, and had blamed the wine, and no one had believed her, and it had been one of the happiest evenings of Hermione's life. Hermione turned from the window when she heard him in the doorway. She always knew when he came into a room now. She had known it through walls in the first weeks of the lie, when it had been a torment, and the knowing had not faded with permission, only changed its colour. The same low awareness of where in the house he was, except that now it was no longer a wound she had to guard, but a warmth she could turn toward openly, which she did every time. He stood in the doorway with the late light on him and a letter in his hand, and there was something in his face she could not at first read. "From the ministry," he said. "The review of your mother's case. The final finding." He crossed the room and gave it to her, and she saw that his hand was not quite steady, and she understood that he had read it already and had not wanted to tell her what it said, had wanted her to read it herself, the way she had once broken the seal on the disposition so that it would be her hands that found it terrible. But it was not terrible. She read it, and her eyes filled, and she had to put her own hand flat against the desk that had held the lie, because the finding was everything. Aurelia's testimony reviewed and upheld, her proof entered into the record at last, the war profiteering she had died to expose, finally named in an official document, 19 years too late to save her, but not too late to clear her. Her competence restored, her good name returned to her in full. The madwoman Lucius had written over her erased, and the clever, brave clerk written back. She was right, the finding said, in the cold, flat language of officialdom that could not know what it was undoing. Her records were falsified. The original is restored. She was right, Hermione said aloud, and her voice broke on it, and Draco's arms came around her from behind, and she leaned back into the warmth of him and let herself weep for the mother she had never met and only just found. The woman whose stubbornness had killed her and whose stubbornness passed down a generation to a daughter she gave away to keep safe had in the end undone the man who killed her. She was right, and now everyone knows it. He couldn't keep her buried. We dug her up. We dug them both up. You did. His mouth was against her hair. Every part of it was you. Your refusal to leave it alone. Your hands against the stone, feeling for the hinge when everyone, including me, told you it was a wall. He turned her in his arms so that she faced him, and he brushed the tears from her face with his thumb. The cold silver of the ring she had felt in the stormlit library still turning against her skin, except that it was no longer the only ring between them now. There was a second one on her own hand, and she felt the small, hard kiss of it against her cheek when she lifted her hand to his face. I spent the first weeks in this house hating myself for what I felt. I taught myself a grammar to forbid it. And you? You never once believed the lie. Not for a day. Your blood knew, you said, the first morning. And you were right about that too. I'm right about a great many things, she said, and laughed through the tears. And he laughed with her, and the late light came gold through the unshrouded windows of the room that had held the worst of it, and now held only them. You are. He kissed her, slow, certain, a kiss with 19 years of stolen time behind it, and a whole lifetime of permitted time ahead. The kind of kiss that was no longer a defiance of anything, because there was nothing left to defy, only the simple, enormous fact of being allowed. And you'll be insufferably right about things for the next 60 years, and I'll be the man who gets to be wrong next to you, and I have never in my life wanted anything so much. Outside, the yews had gone fully green, and the roses Narcissa had planted were budding toward the summer wedding. And somewhere in the restored records of a transparent ministry, a woman named Aurelia stood vindicated at last. Her name returned, her proof entered, her daughter found and free and loved. The wall that a cruel man had built of fresh ink and a ministry seal was struck through and gone. The kinship that had never been was unwritten as thoroughly as it had been written. And the two people he had tried to keep apart by making them family stood together in the bright remade room with no seal in the world against them, holding on to each other in the gold spring light. "Marry me in the roses," he said against her mouth, though it was already arranged, though it had been arranged for weeks, because some things are worth saying aloud even when they are already true, especially when they are already true. "In the roses," she agreed, and rose onto the balls of her feet the way she had in the cold hall the day the wall came down, and kissed him in the warmth and the light and the long-awaited freedom of a love that had grown in the dark under a prohibition and survived the breaking of it, and grown larger still in the open, where it had always, from the very first morning at the iron gates, been meant to grow. And the house that had been built to keep secrets and hold grief held neither any more, only the two of them, and the green spring outside, and the sound of their quiet laughter in a room full of light.
Thank you for staying with me to the end. I want to tell you why I wrote this story. I keep thinking about one simple thing. Sometimes the walls between people are not real. Sometimes they are just words on paper. Someone writes a lie and we believe it. And we stop ourselves from feeling what is true. There is a small moment in the story I love. Hermione stands at the iron gates on the first morning. She reads the paper that says she is a Malfoy. The facts all fit. The seal is real, but her body says no. She feels the wrong before she can prove it. I thought about that a lot while I was writing. How often do we feel that something is wrong, but we stay quiet? How often do we trust the paper more than on our heart? Hermione does not stay quiet. She keeps her hands and the stone. She feels for the hinge, even when everyone says it is only a wall. That is the meaning of this story for me. Do not let a lie tell you who you are. Do not let a lie tell you who you can love. The truth is patient, it waits, and someone brave can always dig it up. Some walls are made of ink, and ink can be washed away. Thank you for listening. I will see you in the next story.